I started working at a small town diner when I turned 18, and that's where I met Tim, a man in his mid-60s, overweight, and somewhat lonely. He was a regular customer, so naturally, I got to know him over time. Tim was peculiar. Many of the younger female servers found him creepy and uncomfortable to deal with. He would often try to engage in strange conversations and brought in bizarre cartoons that he made on his computer. Most servers avoided him, but I was unfazed. I didn't mind talking to him or serving him because he tipped well, usually around $5 or $10 each time, which made a difference in my wages. At first, Tim's visits and behaviors seemed harmless. He would proudly show me the cartoons he made, which were mostly clip art with random names or characters. Though the cartoons were rather strange, I complimented them to make him feel good, as I thought of him as just another eccentric regular who meant no harm. Over time, Tim shared more personal details about his life, revealing that he was lonely, unmarried, and without kids. Visiting different restaurants and talking to young waitresses like me had become his main form of social interaction. Tim started to call me Sunshine, a nickname that stuck throughout our conversations. He gave me unsolicited advice, acting like a concerned grandparent, especially when it came to my personal life. Once, he even criticized my relationship with my boyfriend, which crossed a line for me. I snapped back at him, and Tim later apologized by gifting me a handcrafted wood carving which he had made with my boyfriend's initials on it. This, at the time, seemed sweet, but it was the beginning of a pattern of more unsettling behavior. Soon, Tim's interactions with me began to intensify. He started writing poems and short stories about me and my life. Most of them were terribly written, but I didn't think much of it. He'd often hand them to me when I served him, and though they made me uncomfortable, I continued to serve him because of the tips. Tim, though socially awkward, still appeared harmless enough. However, things started to shift when Tim began talking about my family, especially my twin sister. Despite never having met her, he started writing stories that involved her as a character. He would check out my social media profiles, finding pictures of me, and then he edited them, incorporating strange visual effects and creating odd artwork out of my photos. These depictions became more and more bizarre, but I kept thinking that it was harmless, just a man who was lonely and wanted attention. The shift from innocent to disturbing came when Tim's stories began to sexualize me and my sister. In one particular story, he cast me as a sexy cowgirl that men lusted after, while he wrote my twin sister as a character who contracted an STD. This was when I realized Tim was crossing serious boundaries. I confronted him about it, telling him that it was inappropriate and not okay. Tim, however, seemed nonchalant about my objections and merely rewrote the story, changing a few details but keeping the essence of his strange narrative. It wasn't just the writing. Tim started creating and sharing photoshopped images of me and my sister, one of which involved the two of us holding a platter with his severed head on it. His behavior was becoming more and more disturbing, and I knew something had to change. My patience had worn thin, but I didn't quite know how to cut him off without escalating things further. After nearly 3 years of this odd relationship with Tim, the situation came to a head when I got engaged. When he found out, Tim started to create new stories and cards written from the perspective of my fiancée. He would draw bizarre cartoons and write love letters, claiming they were from my fiancée to me, despite never having met my partner. Tim began to blur the lines between reality and fiction, mixing his fantasy world with my real life, and it became suffocating. I finally decided enough was enough. My fiancée and I agreed that I needed to cut Tim off completely. I told him that I no longer wanted to speak with him and stopped serving him at the diner. Tim, to his credit, took it relatively well. He respected my wishes and left me alone for a while, though he still occasionally kept tabs on me through my sister, who worked at another restaurant that he frequented. For about 2 years, there was no contact. I went on with my life, got married, and moved into a new home. But then, just last week, something happened that sent chills down my spine. While I was at home, I noticed a car parked just outside my house. I couldn't see clearly who was inside, but the car was there for a long time, longer than it should have been. As I walked closer to the window, I realized that it was Tim. He was sitting in his car, grinning at me, holding up a camera. He had been taking pictures of my house. That moment was the most terrifying of all. After years of weird behavior, Tim had crossed into stalker territory. I had hoped that cutting him off would be the end of it, but clearly he hadn't moved on. Despite years of distance, Tim still held on to some twisted fantasy of me and my life. Now, I don't know what to do. I've considered going to the police, but part of me wonders if they would even take it seriously. After all, what evidence do I have? Just a lonely man who makes creepy art and takes pictures from his car. But something tells me that this isn't over, that Tim isn't done. The idea that he might still be out there watching and waiting fills me with dread. How can I even begin to tell you this story? It was the creepiest experience of my life. A night that left me rattled and questioning every choice I've ever made. Just a few moments ago, I found myself on a late-night food run, something I often do to satisfy those midnight cravings. I'm a skeptic by nature, so I rarely let my mind wander to wild conclusions about strangers. But this time, everything aligned in a way that made me shiver. I work from home, which means my sleep schedule often goes haywire, leaving me hungry during the late hours. The only place nearby that stays open is a 24/7 Carl's Jr. /Green Burrito restaurant. I love their fried zucchini, so I make the trip there several nights a week. Every time I go past 1 a.m., there's this one guy who's always behind the counter, tall, maybe 6 feet, slim, and likely in his late 20s or early 30s. I can't quite pinpoint his ethnicity. He's either white or possibly Armenian or Middle Eastern. So, just a couple of hours ago at 2:30 a.m., I headed to Carl's Jr. The routine was the same. I arrived, they played the usual promotional spiel, and I politely declined. But then, something strange happened. The guy on the speaker asked me to pull up to the window. I've never been asked this before at any fast food place, but I shrugged it off. When I got to the window, he informed me that he needed to change the battery on some device before taking my order. I glanced around, half expecting to see the bustling kitchen in motion, but instead, he spent a few minutes fiddling with something in the back. Odd, but again, I didn't think too much of it. I ordered my usual, a jalapeno double cheeseburger and fried zucchini. I handed him my card, and he returned it a minute later. But as I waited, I started to notice strange details. For one, the wait was unusually long, twice as long as normal. I could see him in the kitchen, making odd little movements, but it looked more like he was tinkering with something rather than preparing food. Then came the moment that sent chills down my spine. He approached the window with my food and casually tossed a single ranch cup into the bag, something he had never done before. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just feeling generous. I drove home, settled at my desk, and began eating while watching a show. The food tasted fine, but a nagging sensation tugged at my gut. Next to my burger, I found not just one, but 3 ranch cups and a couple of ketchup packets. I opened the first ranch cup to dip my fried zucchini. It was delicious, and I quickly finished my burger, only to find I was out of ranch. That's when everything hit me like a ton of bricks. The second ranch cup opened far too easily. I had opened enough of these in my life to know when something felt off. I remembered that single ranch cup he tossed in. How could he have known I'd need more? I opened the third ranch cup, and again it slid open with no resistance. Panic began to settle in as I recalled the details. He had taken an unusually long time with my order. He'd messed around in the back, seemingly not preparing anything. Had he tampered with my food? Did he open those ranch cups and reseal them somehow? Fear coursed through me as I pieced it all together. If he did manipulate those ranch cups, it had to have been done with some sort of adhesive in the back, and I had no way of knowing what else he might have done to my meal. I did what I could to protect myself. I didn't tear the seals completely off the 2 suspicious ranch cups. Instead, I taped them shut and placed them in a plastic baggie before tossing them into the fridge. I know it sounds silly, but if something was wrong, maybe I could figure it out later. I can't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at my insides. I feel fine physically, but there's this unsettling urge to gag, a reflex stemming from my imagination running wild. As I sit here, safe and sound, I can't help but wonder, what did he put in my food? I might have just been overthinking it, but in the back of my mind, doubt lingers, tainting the simple act of eating with a sense of dread. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Am I just imagining things, or is there something more sinister at play? It has taken me many years to tell this story, out of both fear and embarrassment. I share this today as more than simply therapy for myself, but as a warning to all people. Be careful who you meet on social media. In 2018, my ex-husband and I were at the end of a very tumultuous marriage. He and I had been polyamorous for about 3 years before I met this guy. His name was Jez. I met Jez on OkCupid. I was 28 and he was 42. We hit it off very quickly. After a few weeks of talking, I agreed to meet up with him in the restaurant close to my house. We sat and talked for a few hours before I invited him over to meet my husband. Things went very well and they seemed to get along, so Jez and I started dating. This guy completely swept me off my feet. Jez was sweet and caring. He enthusiastically listened to every little thing on my mind, engaged, and validated me. Over and over again, he absolutely revered me for my strength and wisdom. He practically worshipped me for all that I was and all I was becoming. He showered me with gifts, flowers, and random good deeds just to make me feel safe, wanted, and cared for. I had never been in a relationship that felt quite like that. It was wonderful. It was as though we had been looking for each other for years. After the first few weeks, he had a meltdown over my polyamorous nature. He pulled the plug because he said he was already falling for me and couldn't handle sharing me. I stood my ground and accepted this boundary and the fact that I would have to let him go. I left that night sad, but confident that I had done the right thing for the both of us. That next week, he sent me flowers and a card to my workplace, begging for another chance and reassuring me that he would rather try than not and end up regretting it. Even though it was scary, he wanted to take this journey with me. We continued dating, and it was just as wonderful. Long nights we spent awake talking, sharing, laughing, lovemaking, and planning. We went places and did things that I had always wanted to do. Then in the deepest, most intimate moments, when we would just sit in silence, he would grip my hand to his face in solidarity and astonishment, asking where I've been all this time. Our time together was effortless. We fit together like puzzle pieces. By August of 2018, my marriage had ended by no fault of Jez's, and by October, my husband had moved out. I was on a lease at the time and knew I couldn't afford the place on my own, so finding a roommate was essential. I had no support system to fall back on, nor did anyone else I know need a place at the time, so Jez offered to move in. Even then, I was hesitant. We had only been together about 4 months, and I knew everything always changes when you move in with a partner. Despite my hesitation, I agreed. He was wonderful to me. How bad could it be? I was not prepared for the change that was to come. It was literally like night and day. Jez suddenly became a different person. He was extremely controlling, jealous, and lazy. Nothing like the person I thought I had met. And the way he treated me progressively got worse and worse. Hanging out with friends became a burden, if not impossible, because he would blow up my phone, guilting me about leaving him alone or not involving him in some way. Yet when I tried to, it was also treated as a burden, an inconvenience, as he would huff and puff his way through even the concept of leaving space for anyone but ourselves. In December of 2018, we attended my work Christmas party. I had given him the option whether he wanted to go or not. It was really neither here nor there for me, especially because I had already learned that he really didn't do well if he felt pressured into social situations. I opened the invitation to him because he had expressed to me over and over that it was important for him that he was involved in my social life. For the full month he knew about it, he insisted that he wasn't going. I took it as him being introverted and didn't push the issue. I let him know that I would make sure he felt welcome if he decided to go, but not to feel obligated. I was surprised when he changed his mind at the last minute and insisted on going, and even more stunned when we went and he actively acted as though he did not want to be there. Everyone there was incredibly welcoming and included him in the festivities and conversation. However, he still practically grumbled the entire night about the whole thing, mumbling insults and critiquing every little part of the party under his breath, as though being there was absolutely awful to have to endure. No one really seemed to notice the low whispering insults and gripes. At one point, after a couple of glasses of wine, my direct manager leaned into Jez and started praising him. She and I were very close, therefore she was intimately familiar with what I had gone through with my ex-husband. "I am so happy she has you," she bleated through Wine Happy. "You have been absolutely transformative for her. It's so nice to see her finally happy and appreciated." Without missing a beat, Jez grimaced at the comment and quickly snapped back, "You don't fucking know me." I honestly didn't believe my ears. It was one of those moments where time stops and you just know you couldn't have heard that correctly. I sat brewing on it for a minute before another light-hearted interaction with Jez prompted him to suddenly snap at me through grit teeth. "Stop it." This triggered me and I lost it. I pulled him outside and asked him what his problem was. I called out his behavior and told him if he was going to act that way, then he could just leave. That if he didn't want to be there, he should have stayed home. He ended up giving a sort of half-assed apology, and we went back inside and finished the party. I remember the drive home that night, staring out the dark window and nothing in particular, in worried silence. "I might have messed up," was my only thought through the entire drive. This all started out slow, of course, like waving me away or invalidating my experiences and ideas due to my age, that I was just dramatizing my experiences because I was young, etc. The man who, not 6 months prior, had validated me, my trauma, and experiences to the ends of the earth. Now every time I started a story or tried to share anything, even trying to plan out meals for the week, he would openly show annoyance as though I was violating his time and attention. Before I knew it, he was snapping at me over every little thing. If I asked how his day was or talked about my day, I would aggressively shut it down. "Why do you always ask me that? I don't want to talk shop at home. I really don't care about your work. It's work." Before I knew it, I couldn't even bring him a plate of breakfast without being snapped at. It was as though he was testing me. When Jez and I first started dating, he flat out refused to talk about most all of his exes. He refused to name them or discuss any of the issues or lessons learned. They didn't matter, he would claim. They weren't in his life for a reason. It was the same reasoning he also used in reference to my more recent exes. Talking about them, including my now ex-husband, may as well have become off limits. Anytime I brought up either of our exes, he would become incredibly agitated, belittling, and just overall very aggressive. I took this as both an age gap issue, as I have a tendency to dwell, as well as insecurity and a threat to the life he was trying to build. However, after he moved in and this hot button topic had been established, several times he would bring up his exes and how they looked, telling me on more than one occasion he would have never dated me back in the day, and that I was lucky he lowered his standards. I didn't even really know what to say to this. I would laugh it off and shove it in my back pocket. Noted. He then started bringing up my looks and accusing me of catfishing him. I had stopped taking care of myself due to the isolation and had also put on some weight, so most of my clothes that I had once felt great in no longer fit. And since Jez had also been dishonest with me about his financial position, he was always needing extra money here and there, leaving me broke almost all of the time. A horrible tragedy happened that following summer while Jez and I were together. I received notice that a good friend I went to art school with shot himself in the head while tripping on LSD. Our whole class was devastated, He was, without contest, the best photographer of our class and one of the most kind-hearted individuals I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. Also, as someone who is very familiar with LSD, I was rocked. Jez, however, was far from supportive. He pretty much immediately shrugged it off. That's life. I guess that's what he gets for fucking around with LSD. I was baffled at such an unsympathetic response, and even more later when Jez started to interrogate me about my relationship with this guy, asking when the last time it was that I had even talked to this friend. You don't even know this guy anymore. Who cares? I broke up with him the first time after he called me at work raging. I was busy, so I wasn't able to answer right away. But once I was finally able to answer, I was met with intense anger. It was storming, and one of my dogs was having an anxiety attack due to storm and separation anxiety. This wasn't the first time, and he was well aware of what she needed in those moments. Why the fuck aren't you answering my calls? You answer when I call you. I don't care where you are. He went on for a few minutes, calling me a shitty girlfriend and laying into me over my sudden distance and lack of communication while I was at work. At this point, I was done, and I lost it. I tore into him over everything, especially causing problems for me at work. That being in my life is a privilege, and if he's going to wake up every day acting like he hates me, then I don't know what on earth he's even doing with me. I told him that I expected him to get his things and leave. He was always threatening to go back to his old roommates where there was still a room. I didn't want him there when I got home, and we could coordinate times for him to come and get the rest. He flat refused, suddenly victimizing himself, claiming he had nowhere to go. How dare you make me fall in love with you? How dare you take me to meet your father and then dump me? My manager and her husband ended up following me home that evening because she was concerned for my safety and had offered to let me stay with her for a few days. I will never forget the scene I walked into. Like Theon Greyjoy begging for his life, my boss stood next to me, watching as this 42-year-old man crawled on his knees before me, begging for mercy and communication. At one point, wrapping his arms around my legs, crying into them, "I can't believe this is happening. She's the love of my life, you know that?" he cried to my boss. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This was the antithesis of the heartless person I had been spending my days with. I shook him off and went to the back of the house, gathering enough of my things to get me through the next few days, as well as any and all valuables I could think of. It took a few days, but after about a week, Jez started blowing up my phone, apology after apology. Suddenly, he was the man I met again, full of humility and self-awareness. He acknowledged the awful way he had treated me and sent me walls and walls of well-thought-out messages, psychoanalyzing his own behavior, where it comes from, and the ways he knows it needs to change. I took him back. Like a dumb, desperate girl, I took him back. It wasn't long into this second round that he started to guilt me over the breakup. My panic had damaged his relationship with the people in my life, and he made sure that I knew it was my responsibility to fix it. It wasn't long after this that my car ended up breaking down at a gas station close to home. There was a very nice couple in the vehicle next to me that came to my rescue and checked things out under my hood. The gentleman turned out to be a mechanic for a living, so he had a pretty good theory about what could potentially be going on. By this time, I had already attempted to contact Jez to let him know what was going on and where I was. It wasn't long till he got off work, so he told me to sit tight and he would be there shortly. Meanwhile, this sweet couple stayed put and kept me company while I waited. Jez barreled in about 15 minutes later, completely ignoring the couple that had helped me. Touching base, the gentleman handed me a slip of paper with a name and phone number on it, reviewing what he thought was going on with my car, before Jez butted in, cutting him off. "I said she's fine," he snapped. I could see the woman, out of the corner of my eye, slink away at this comment and get into the passenger seat of their car. I could feel the sudden tension, like maybe she's been here before. The gentleman didn't move and shifted his attention to me as Jez walked into the store. I could see he was clearly concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low, almost whisper. "You don't have to answer that, but if you need anything." He looked down at the number in my hand and nodded to it. "Seriously." With that, he got into the driver's seat of his car and drove away. I've thought about that couple countless times since that night. Everything went right back to the way it was before, as though the initial breakup never even happened. The same eggshells, the same belittling. If anything, it was worse, because I had permanently damaged our relationship. If I had just not been so dramatic, if I didn't run away from everything, then maybe he wouldn't have to work so hard for respect in my life. One night, we got into an argument. I don't even remember what it was about, but I had to be up early for work the next morning, so I paused the argument in order to get some sleep. When I went to lay down, I heard the TV turn on. I have a soundbar, so the volume can get pretty loud. Jez proceeded to turn the volume up and up and up, far past any volume I ever pushed those same speakers to, even for parties. The very walls were reverberating with the sound of the TV at astronomical volumes. Jez then started laughing hysterically. It was a laughter manic with anger, as though something might be funny on TV, but he might also jump through a window right now. I remember laying in bed, absolutely horrified at what was happening. I knew things had gotten bad, but now I was scared. I got out of bed and asked him to turn it down, to which he responded, scoffing, "I'll watch TV if I've asterisk in 1-2, and turned it up even louder. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I started crying at this point, begging him to please, just let me sleep. He started mocking me and calling me names for crying. "Oh, wow, poor baby is crying again. That's your card, isn't it? Crying." This caused the fight to start again, and he started screaming at me, followed me to my bedroom, where he suddenly punched a door not 2 inches from my head. His eyes were black, and he looked me in the eye, sending the clear, unsympathetic, and hostile message that was a warning, and next time he wouldn't miss. My whole system had shut down at this point, and I sunk to the floor in a panic attack. My ex-husband had issues with violence. Jez knew that. All our rentals prior to that one had holes in walls and doors peppered throughout our unit due to my ex-husband's inability to handle his emotions, but he never hit me or even came close to it. I crumpled to the ground, feeling powerless, trapped, and afraid. As my thoughts continued to race, he continued to berate and mock my panic state. Most of our argument from that night was a blur, but ended abruptly once he threatened to put my social security number on the dark web. At this point, all that was left in me was to fight. I blacked out and went ballistic, screaming at him to get out. I felt rabid and dangerous as I screamed like a banshee for him to leave my home. It was over, and I was ending it that second. I contacted my landlord and explained what had been going on. Jez would also end up contacting her, weaving his own tale that I was moving out, and tried to have the lease transferred into his name. Luckily, since I was several steps ahead of him, my landlord didn't fall for it and contacted me immediately. She personally came and changed my locks for me, gave me the personal contact of a police officer close by in case he showed up again, and took half off my rent for the next month. I am forever grateful to her for these simple acts of kindness that were above and beyond anything I would ever expect from a landlord. It took weeks for him to stop messaging me. The only reason I didn't block him was out of fear that he would show up at my house. Though I had contacts for protection, I knew I would rather get a daily apology video than have to deal with him on my doorstep. So they persisted. For a while, the same act from before. The love bombing, the promises, grasping at straws, trying to find the weak spot where I would let him back in. But I ignored it. It continued for weeks before he finally gave up. He bowed out gracefully, stating boldly that he will always love me. I left him on read. The illusion was destroyed. It took me several years to pick up the pieces. If my divorce wasn't enough, this definitely made me lose trust in myself. I still don't understand what the endgame was. In one of our last discussions, I asked him desperately, what happened to the guy I fell in love with? Jez looked me dead in the eye, smirked, and said, that guy doesn't exist. I told you what I had to tell you in order to get you away from that fucking asshole husband of yours. You're just stupid and fell for it. How can I even begin to tell you that story? It still haunts me to this day. A night so disturbing, it's hard to believe it happened, but I swear, every bit of it is true. I work as a waitress in this small, cozy Italian restaurant. Only 12 tables, where everyone knows each other, or at least that's how it felt. We don't get a lot of new faces, which makes things like this unforgettable. Usually we only have 2 to 3 servers working a shift, so nothing goes unnoticed. This all started back in December. A man, probably in his late 50s, began coming in regularly. He always sat alone, tucked away in the farthest corner, away from the other diners. At first, he seemed normal, friendly even. I waited on him a few times and we'd make small talk. But as weeks went by, his questions became uncomfortable. He'd ask me personal things no customer should ever ask. I remember one time I casually mentioned that I was a dancer, something innocent, right? But he stared at me a little too long, then asked me to send him a video of me dancing. I didn't know what to say, so I laughed it off and told him maybe. That was a mistake. A few weeks passed and he kept coming in. Each time his conversations grew shorter, colder. One night during a busy shift, he came in again, but something felt different. He didn't try to talk to me much, just ordered his usual and sat in the far corner, staring. His eyes never left me, and it was more than just a glance. It was this heavy, suffocating gaze. You know that feeling when you can just feel someone watching you. It was like that, except much worse. It was like his eyes were drilling holes into me. When I walked past his table, I glanced at him and instantly regretted it. His face, It was twisted, red, furious. His eyes were wide and his lips curled into a smile, but not a kind one. It was the kind of grin that sends a chill down your spine. His hands were hidden under the table, and something about that made me feel uneasy, but I tried not to think too much about it. I had other customers to take care of. As the night wore on, he barely touched his food, but stayed longer than usual. I kept my distance. When I finally looked back at his table after serving others, I noticed he had disappeared. Relieved, I walked over to clean up, and that's when I saw it. Crumpled napkins all over the floor, like he was frantically wiping something. My stomach turned. I reached for the check, and right beside it, on a napkin, he left a message. "I'll see you soon, Jessica." The thing is, I never told him my name. I felt this overwhelming dread crawl over me. I ran to the back and told the owner everything. He sent me home immediately, promising he'd look into it, but I could tell from the look on his face that he didn't believe me. Months passed, and I didn't see him again. I started to think maybe it was over, that maybe I had overreacted, but then something happened that made me wish I had never waited on that man. Late one night, after closing the restaurant, I was heading to my car. The parking lot was empty, and there were no cars but mine. As I reached for my keys, a cold breeze brushed my neck, making me shiver. I turned around, and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing under the only flickering streetlight, was a figure. My eyes adjusted, and I recognized him immediately. The man from the restaurant. He stood there, still, watching me. I quickly unlocked my car and sped away, but when I got home, that's when things got worse. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You looked beautiful tonight." I froze. How did he get my number? How did he know where I lived? I called the police, but they couldn't do anything because there was no proof he'd followed me. Days later, strange things started happening. I'd find my doors unlocked, lights flickering on and off, and once I woke up to find a napkin left on my doorstep. The message was simple: soon. I quit my job, moved out of my apartment, and changed my number, but the fear never left me. I still don't know how he got that information. I've spent sleepless nights wondering if he's still out there, watching, waiting. So, to the man who left me those napkins and violated my sense of safety, I hope I never ever see you again. But somehow, I know I probably will.